When you think of Portuguese football, the spotlight usually falls on Benfica and Porto, mostly due to their consistent performances in Europe and big money sales. Sporting though, the most, it's just Ronaldo's old team. Some don't even get the name right and call them Sporting Lisbon. But here's the thing, Sporting is on the brink of becoming Portugal's next super team. After 20 years of heartbreak and chaos, culminating in a fan invasion and a controversial leadership change, the club is finally rising. Thanks to the unlikely heroics of Rúben Amorim, Sporting went from being the butt of the joke to making a fool out of every team in their path. So in this video, we'll unpack the dramatic fall and remarkable rise of Sporting CP and why their current success might just reshape Portugal football history forever. But first, let me give you some context. In the exact season where Cristiano Ronaldo made his professional debut, Sporting were the defending champions. Of course, there was always the chance of them failing to recapture the title, but no one could imagine that it would take so long to go back to the top of the mountain. After all, the Lions had won 2 out of the last 3 championships and had a bunch of promising youngsters coming up, including Pep, Dani, Quaresma, and obviously Cristiano Ronaldo. However, none of those stars would play a huge role in the history of the club. Still, that's not to say Sporting didn't have solid squads during the 2000s. Lee Edson, one of the best strikers in the club's history, was their main man up front during this period. World champion Anderson Polga was also a mainstay in defense, while their midfield had pretty good names such as Matias Fernandes or João Moutinho. Although, you don't want to bring that last name to a Sporting fan, trust me. Besides, they always challenged for the league title, especially during Paulo Bento's tenure, but for one reason or another, they always dropped the ball when it mattered the most. By the early 2010s, Sporting began falling behind their rivals. Porto continued to dominate by winning 3 out of the first 4 league titles in the 2010s, Benfica improved a lot with the arrival of Jorge Jesus, and after winning the 2009-2010 championship, they were always competitive, something that hadn't happened in the previous 2 decades. Sporting, on the other hand, made many mistakes in the market that slowly but surely destroyed any chances they had of challenging their rivals. In fact, at that point, they were mostly fighting with Braga for 3rd place. But that's no surprise when the club was in complete disarray. There were elections almost every year, yet no real change occurred, and the club continued to sink closer and closer to bankruptcy. Until a savior emerged. The Portuguese Donald Trump desperately trying to make Sporting great again, Bruno de Carvalho. If the club's elections relied solely on the socios' votes, he would have been present by 2011, but either way, he eventually rose to power in 2013 in the end of Sporting's worst season ever. In 2012-2013, the Lions finished in 7th place and spent the vast majority of the term in the lower half of the table. But thankfully, best days were on the horizon. Immediately after taking over as Sporting's president, Bruno de Carvalho recovered the near-bankruptcy club by negotiating a debt restructuring plan with a banking institution. Furthermore, Carvalho reduced liabilities, payroll costs, and signed the most lucrative TV rights contract in the history of Portuguese football, with NOS for 515 million euros. He even managed to attract Benfica's manager Jorge Jesus for the 2015-16 season, in which the club had their best performance ever in the league, registering 86 points in a grueling campaign that would once again end in heartbreaking fashion. The Lions could only reach 2nd place, and what hurts the most is that if this goal had gone in, they would have won the league. From 2016 until 2018, Sporting would have decent performances both in Europe and in the league, but ultimately they could never win the championship nor reach the same heights as they did back in 2016. Bruno Carvalho was becoming extremely unstable. He was buying wars with the Portuguese media and even demanded that Sporting fans only watch the news from their own TV channel. Every week there was a new controversy, spitting his vape fluids on the president's face, criticizing his players in long-ass Facebook posts, and suspending those who denounced his comments. Until one day, Sporting had to live their worst day ever. 40 mass Sporting fans invaded the club's training ground and beat up the players. It was something that had never happened before, and it served as a catalyst for the expulsion of Bruno Carvalho, not only as president, but also as a member of the club. Several important players like Rui Patrício, William Carvalho, Gelson Martins and Rafael Leão terminated their contracts because of that ordeal, which made even the most optimistic fans genuinely fear for the club's future. Bruno de Carvalho might have helped take the club out of a massive hole back in 2013, but just 5 years later and the club was in an even darker situation. And the worst part of it all is that there wasn't a consensual figure to replace him. Sporting fans were extremely divided. Some believed Bruno was wrongfully kicked out of the club, others wanted peace and stability and felt they would have never get it with Bruno at the helm. Either way, eventually someone stepped up, and that man was the club's former clinical director, Frederico Varandas. His name was far from the ideal choice for the supporters, and his repetitive bad choices for the managerial role completely destroyed the little support he still received from a margin of Sporting fans. His back was against the wall. He knew he had to go all in, otherwise he would soon be on his way out. And so, he made a decision that would shock every Portuguese fan. When the 2019-20 season was already coming to an end, Varandas decided to spend 10 million euros on then Braga manager Rúben Amorim. It was a perplexing move that even Amorim commented that he would probably not spend as much money on himself if he was in Varandas' shoes. After all, Amorim was only coaching for 2 years and he hadn't even completed a full season in Portugal's top flight. Nonetheless, his impressive run of form with Braga and unique football philosophy convinced Varandas to bet on the young manager. He wouldn't even reach the podium in his first months, but the massive drop in form that Braga suffered after his departure already showed signs that he was indeed the biggest responsible for Braga's success. Besides, Sporting's squad at the time wasn't ready to play in Amorim's 3-4-3 system. Their squad was simply a mix of a bunch of different coaches' ideas that didn't quite fit with each other. Fast forward the year and the situation was completely different. Amorim got some precious handpicked signings, the always creative Pedro Gonçalves and his favorite striker in the whole world, Paulinho. Plus, he also put a lot of focus on getting versatile players like Nuno Santos and Mateus Reis. Lastly, Sporting also secured the loan of 2 key players, former academy graduates João Mário and Pedro Porro. With a team built exactly how Amorim wanted, he certainly delivered. Almost 20 years later, in the middle of a pandemic, Sporting fans took their old scarves to the streets and threw them in the air, causing one of the worst dust storms that the country had ever seen. I'm just joking, but even though I'm not a Sporting fan, I couldn't help but feel good for them, because as a supporter of one of the biggest Portuguese clubs, I was going crazy when we spent 5 years without winning a trophy, so I can even fathom what it's like going 2 decades without winning the league. Either way, it's worth noting that no matter how big of a feat it was to finally win a championship after almost 20 years, one of the biggest reasons behind that conquest was COVID-19. You see, for as long as I can remember, the biggest Sporting haters were neither Benfica nor Porto fans. They were always their own supporters. No matter how well they were playing and for how long they were in a good run of form, as soon as the club played a few bad matches, they would immediately turn against it and create a bad atmosphere. I mean, I know it's an extreme example, but just look at what happened in 2018. Big clubs in Portugal are always victims of stronger scrutiny, but Sporting always faced a hell of a lot more than the other 2 giants. So COVID was really a blessing in disguise. Not only did it completely derail Benfica's season start, but it also provided peace and stability when Sporting faced some rough patches and almost gave the title away to Porto in the end of the season. However, that remarkable season wouldn't translate to a dominating period, as Varandas sold several key players and failed to replace them properly. For the next 2 seasons, Sporting saw their rivals conquer the league title, but for an impatient club eager to go for the manager's head whenever the climb got harder, it's impressive how Varandas stuck with Amorim. He stood by his side against the critics, many of whom desperate to prove Varandas wrong after he cut ties with the ultra supporters, or simply do because they still longed for Bruno de Carvalho. But their voices didn't impact anything, and in 2023, Varandas finally gave the last pieces of the puzzle that Amorim so eagerly waited for. Sporting bought Victor Gyokeres, a Brighton reject trying to make his name in the championship, and Morten Hjulmand, another unknown player quietly building his name in Italy. Gyokeres was vital to the club's development as he lifted the weight of carrying Sporting's attack out of Paulinho's shoulders, and Hjulmand added some much needed stability and creative output that made every fan forget about Ugarte. Those additions, plus the well-mixed group of veterans and versatile players, led the club to glory with flying colors and busted the myth once and for all that Sporting only wins championships every 20 years. As we're currently standing, Sporting is miles above their rivals, who are both rebuilding their squad and living periods of extreme instability, one in a financial aspect and the other in terms of poor management. So for the first time in my 20 years of watching football, I gotta say that Sporting are really the biggest candidates to win the league. They have won all of their league matches so far and scored 16 goals across 4 matches. Gyokeres continues to hit the back of the net as much as he hits on Portuguese actresses, and Amorim is determined to stay until a football giant comes calling his name. I really wonder how they'll do in the Champions League. This Sporting side is arguably as strong as the last Porto squad that won the Europa League in 2011, and in my eyes, despite having won an European trophy, I always ponder what could that Porto achieve if they had played in the Champions League. Sporting won't have an easy road, but I'm confident they could produce the first notable underdog run in this new Champions League format. Finally, I just want to thank those who watched Throne FC. I've been going through some difficult times and sometimes it gets hard to keep up with the channel when life and work gets in the way. But I know that even if the views aren't as high as I would like them to be, there are always people who enjoy themselves watching and hearing me talk about this sport that I'm so passionate about. And that's all I need to feel that all the effort is worth it. So once again, thanks for your support and your kind words, and I will see you in the next one.